at the start. That's crazy. Where was I? When it comes to tackling topics, it doesn't necessarily matter how deep you go. As long as you don't forget it the next day, because then you effectively just sort of wasted your time. But you want to tackle these topics and keep yourself busy rather than just constantly absorbing new and new ideas, because you don't want to put yourself in a position where you give up before you can even give things a chance. In regards to how deep we want to tackle our topics, though, like I said before, a good bare minimum is enough such that you're familiar with what it is and you won't forget it like a week from now. Uh, I've been constantly exposed to new things all the time, and I try to make sure that I'll remember them in the future, even if I don't know them in any significant amounts of depth, because for whatever reason, I didn't take the time to. Likewise, you don't want to cap yourself off at how deep you want to investigate any one particular topic, because I mean, if it's really interesting to you and you have the time to do it and you want to do it, just go for it. Don't put any sort of artificial blockers on you. Now, one of the benefits of doing this within this process of just sort of digging really deep into whatever subject you feel like running into is that you run into a bunch of tangential topics, because within the IT and information security space, a lot of things are intertwined and interrelated. So for example, you might be doing some research and reading a blog post. That blog post brings up three different topics, three different domains of security or concepts that you're not familiar with. This exposes you to more things that you can take a look into. More personal example is my experience on Cal Poly CCDC team. For the past 3 years, or CCDC for reference is the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. And for the past 3 years, I've been, despite being a Windows person at heart and who does Windows research, I've been doing the Linux sysadmin work for 3 years. Go figure. When I first started, I didn't know anything at all. I knew that you could restart a computer, and that's about it. But I was exposed to some concepts and certain things on Linux, such as the services and applications that it hosts, as well as its firewall. And by doing more research into those, I got exposed into more things, such as, and thanks in part to WRCCDC, by investigating, trying to get better at understanding, configuring, and installing Linux services, I ended up having to learn and deal with a technology called Kubernetes. In the process of trying to figure out how to set up a secure firewall and learning how to do all that, I had to learn what networking was, because I didn't know how computers talk to each other or how traffic actually worked. And it sort of leads into the next part, which is going to be, what about the fundamentals? A lot of people, everyone has their different ways to learn. And in my personal opinion, it's really up to how you feel like it. A lot of people have a sort of, I guess the term for it would be like a dogma, where there's you need to learn this in this order, and you have to do things exactly in this manner for the best results. And sure, it might give you the best results if you do it that way, but me personally, I find the fundamentals sort of boring. If I'm looking into a topic and I don't find it interesting just yet, why would I find the sort of key pillars that that allow that topic to exist? Why would I find those important? At least for me, trying to learn the fundamentals first sort of puts like a blocker into reaching my end result. So this is completely my personal opinion, but it doesn't matter how you learn, as long as you get to your end destination, which is you learned what you wanted to learn, and you'll learn the fundamentals along the way. At the bottom here, I mean, I can't see, so I don't want to turn to look, but if you learn the fundamentals and then do like a more natural progression, things, go straight. But I can't do that. Learning the fundamentals puts a wall towards whatever I want to learn, and I end up just not learning it at all. So what I do is I self-teach, which is a lot more, I like to say it wastes time, but I mean, I get to the end destination anyway. So that's all that really matters to me. And if I wasn't going to get to the end destination from learning in someone else's methodology that they impose on me, then it's better that I just do things the way I want to. How are we doing? Okay, I think we're doing good on time. So now that we got the ball rolling, how do we gain more depth when it comes to our technical skills? Because a common problem is going to be that I see happen a lot is people get some variation of tutorial hell where they constantly read I don't know, like blog post after blog post, or they read some sort of article after article, or they'll just do a bunch of try hack me rooms and just get exposed to a lot of things, learn them at a surface level, but not really know anything at a very deep level. It's very important in this industry to specialize in certain things, but on top of that, knowing more than a surface level, it's just a best practice to do so. So the second barrier that seems to happen for some people is they'll be familiar with a lot of what some people might call like the basics. Like they'll know how a computer can like ping each other. They'll know how virtual machines are set up, but doing anything beyond that, applying that knowledge any further is it's a bit foreign to them. So this section is going to be focusing on how do we actually get, for lack of better words, how do we get good? And I like to think of it as like a three-step, almost like a project process. The three steps involved are going to be identifying a topic, something that you want to learn in significant depth. This should be easy because you've already been exposed to a lot of different ideas. So you have a bunch of things you can choose from, whatever seems most interesting to you. If it gives you, if you have any sort of question remaining from whatever information you've been exposed to, that's a perfect just grab that question and start investigating more into that topic. Now, the second phase is going to be doing some research because I mean you kind of have to do a lot of research if you want to get good at any particular thing. Ideally, you want to understand the topic in depth. So if you can answer questions such as what is it, why does it exist, what problem did whatever topic you're researching, what problem did it address, or what did it provide? What capability did it provide? You also want to understand the things that are tangential to it, or the topics it builds upon, if there are any. So sort of repeating that in-depth understanding for all components involved, rather than just understanding one thing and not knowing why any of the underlying components that work with it. And then you also want to get hands-on. There's only so much you can do if you continuously just keep reading article after article or not putting your hands on the keyboard and actually just trying to figure out how the thing works. Everything can work in theory and everything does work in theory, but when you actually try to put things into practice and then you run into troubleshooting errors or you run into also whatever things that you'd never expect, that really gives you that additional learning opportunity that reading from an article or just just reading from an article wouldn't give you. Man, I'm really thirsty today. And the last part is you want to create some sort of product out of this. A lot of us sort of just stop at like understanding a topic and then putting it into practice by I don't know, like creating it in a virtual lab, recreating whatever you wanted to test and figuring it out, and then we kind of leave it at that. But if we want to take it a step further, and this is something that I'm a strong advocate for because it's helped me put myself where I am today, is you want to create some sort of product out of it. If you can create my favorite one is going to be a blog post. Blog posts are often very insightful and contain a lot of detail and the nuances about what you ran into while you're trying to learn a specific subject. And on top of just being effectively a log of what you learn that you can refer back to, because I refer back to mine very often, blog posts sort of put you in the position of a teacher. It's one thing to know something, it's another thing to try to actually teach it, because you need to know so many ins and outs of a particular subject if you want to teach it well and be able to handle all sorts of questions that might come into your way. Another product that you can create out of doing this sort of research and learning is code. A lot of things can be coded, whether it be a script to automate some sort of installation that you did, or if code already exists, can you extend it? Can you apply it in a way that it originally wasn't can you add a capability to it that it originally wasn't doing? Or can you abstract what it's doing to make things easier for other people who may not understand the original code? And once you have all this stuff, publishing it is nice. Not just so you can get funny internet points, because I am definitely not addicted to that at all. One of the benefits of publishing is you get visibility. People get to recognize your name either in the industry or just on a personal level. Being able to, this is effectively another way of networking. A lot of the professionals that I talk to in the industry and who have given me additional insights into learning and given me a lot of help in technical stuff, a lot of it came from them recognizing the work that I put out publicly and either following up with me or anything along the lines of that. And the last thing, since a lot of us are students, it's resume material. The majority of the projects I do, at least the coolest ones that I think I do, I put it on my resume if it's relevant. And the ones that I don't put on my resume, they're all on my blog. And my blog is linked on my resume. Whenever I'm in an interview, either one of my projects or all of my projects come up, or my blog posts come up. And it's one of the most frequent subjects whenever it comes to an interview. So, if publishing stuff doesn't seem that interesting, but you want to have some sort of, if you're more interested in seeing actual value come out of the stuff you do, the resume route is definitely going to be one of them. Okay. Now I'm going to be moving, this next set of slides is going to be basically an application of this gaining depth process, the 3-step process I was talking about earlier. It's going to be an application of it. Specifically last year when I was introduced to a new topic, it was a malware technique, and I wanted to figure out how it worked. Fair warning, it's going to be getting pretty technical, so if some of the details don't make sense or you don't have the background understanding for some of it, that's completely fine. All of this is basically just to sort of act as an example of my thought flow and the methodology that it comes to sort of doing this research stuff. So identifying a topic. This is what I ran into sometime last year. It was about 6 months old at the time. A guy named Klesvirus, he's a malware developer and a penetration tester. He created a proof of concept called Silent Moonwalk, and he called it a true call stack spoofer. And when I read this, I thought, wow, I don't know what any of that meant. I know he makes malware, so it's probably malware related, and he does Windows. I do Windows, so maybe we have a start somewhere. Immediately, we already have some questions. What is stack spoofing, and what does this proof of concept try to address? Very few people put out things arbitrarily. There's usually some sort of purpose behind it. So I wanted to figure out what that purpose was and what this thing does in general. So this takes us to the next step, doing our research. Now, when it comes to doing research, we have to think about what are our sources, right? Because you have Google, but that, in my opinion, saying just Google it, it's kind of vague because depending on what you're researching, Google might not give you a lot of results. Oftentimes, you're going to have research that directly covers the topic. So it's, in this case, he put out a blog post. It's a bit self-explanatory. And you have research that indirectly covers the topic that you're investigating. This comes in different forms, but it's effectively somebody talking about a different subject, but mentioning what you're primarily interested in within it, and they might give some explanation or additional pointers. Getting these different perspectives into the topic that you're researching is really helpful for just being more well-rounded and understanding the topic holistically. And then you have, these usually come in different forms of blogs, papers, and code. I like blogs because they're pretty personal and you get to see someone's thought flow through them, which is also why I like writing them. Then you have code, which is a mixed bag because sometimes the code is written good and sometimes you can't read it at all, depending what language it is and depending how well they documented the code. So that's always sort of fun. And then you have papers. Papers are, those formal research stuff that people put out. I don't like those a lot, but sometimes you have to read through them. They can be very lengthy. And one thing that I didn't list here, but I should mention is documentation from the vendor of the specific technology that you're working with. So for example, if I'm looking into Windows malware, such as Microsoft documentation on operating system APIs will be helpful. It's hard to find exactly what you want in the documentation, but just knowing it's available, and then sometimes you'll just think, oh, I need this information right now. The documentation has it. That can be very helpful. So if we investigate the code, going back to silent moonwalk, if we investigate the code of it, we'll see that on the GitHub repo, it says it supports 2 modes. And then looking into the names of the files, there's something called the desync spoofer and something called the synthetic spoofer. So I already didn't know what call stack spoofing was, and now he said there's 2 versions of it. So this is really helpful. Not really. And if we investigate the repo as a whole, there's 1,200 lines of C and 500 lines of assembly. So this was going to be a very interesting look at the start. And even if this seems unapproachable, and the reason why I say that is because I didn't write C or assembly, so reading code written in C and assembly is going to be an interesting experience. Don't let that block you. Like I said, if you want to do something, do it. Just learn along the way. Unless you're a professional. I would hope you know the fundamentals if you are doing things in a professional work, but we're a student, so it doesn't matter. So the first question I had when I came up with the topic or during the topic selection was why? Why does call stack spoofing exist? And luckily this was answered immediately when I started reading the blog. It was like the first or the second paragraph. And the blog quotes, "The call stack indeed can provide a security solution with important contextual information regarding a function call, including the module that called the current function and the exact path that the call took to reach the current function." So this already gives us a lot of key information. So mainly, it explains to us what a call stack is and kind of hints why spoofing it would be helpful. What we can get out of this is that a call stack is effectively a series of records that a process produces whenever an operating system function is called. These series of records can be used to discern between whether the operating system made a call from a good caller or a malicious caller, based on whether or not the entries within this call stack show up with the name of a file on the file system, such as on the left, we have kernel32 DLL and TDLL and notepad exe. What we can discern out of this is that notepad was making some calls, which is fine, right? But on the right, this is what a malicious call stack might end up looking like. If we look, we can see NTDLL, ZW wait for single object was called, which was called by wait for single object. But what wait for single object was called by is sort of unknown. It's a bunch of random numbers and it cannot be resolved to an actual file on the file system. So this is an indication that it's probably malware. And the reason for this is, because I had more background knowledge on this, is malware loves to live in memory. Everyone always talks about you got to stay in memory. You can't be a file on disk. So it's only logical that when the call stack shows up with some sort of record that points to an address rather than a file name, that's most likely going to be malware or some computer doing some really goofy stuff. But for the most part, it is malware. Oh, and the reason this also sort of addresses why call stack spoofing would be helpful. This addresses it indirectly, because if we're able to spoof our records, we can make the telemetry that our malware generates look legitimate. So yeah, wow, reading a blog post already answered like most of our questions. That's cool. Going into the process of achieving spoofing. So we, at least at a high level, we understand what spoofing is now, but now we want to understand how do we actually achieve spoofing, right? So reading more into the blog post, he talks about setting up 3 different suitable function frames, whatever that means. And for reference, a frame is effectively a single entry within that call stack earlier. So on the right here, we would have 10 frames. On the left, 5. Well, it's, yeah, 5 and 10. And then reading further into the blog post, he also answers a question that we would generated while we were doing our research. At first, we were wondering what call stack spoofing is and what does it address. And then once we figured that out, we had a new question. How do we do it? And this is partially answered as we kept reading through the blog post. He states, I'll just TLDR it, but he basically states that files have a data structure in them called the runtime function table. And this contains information that when we calculate it, we can create a frame out of it. So it's not super clear, but it gives us a direction. Now, looking at other works that may have addressed this topic, there's very few times where there'll only be one person who comes up with research for a particular topic. Anytime you've had an idea, someone else has probably had it before, unless you're at that 0.0001%. I'm not that 0.001%. So doing more research into call stack spoofing, we can see that this has sort of been addressed before. There was a blog by a company called WithSecure. They talked about something that they were doing called spoofing at rest. So this kind of gives us a differentiation between what this blog post was talking about and what Silent Moonwalk was talking about, which was coined as the term actively spoofing. Now, by reading this blog post, we get some more additional insights into how call stack spoofing can actually be achieved. Before the first blog post by Klez said that you can calculate certain information from a data structure within a file to create a frame. This blog post, luckily, is a bit more specific. It tells you how these frames actually end up sort of looking. There is an address to a return address on the top, followed by the size of the function that return address pertains to. So a little more of an idea, something that we can definitely try to work with now since we have clearer information. So once again, just addressing the why. Call stack spoofing is here to make our calls look legitimate. If we take a look back at the repo and look at the pictures that are provided, on the left-hand side, we have that normal stack that I generated from just running Notepad and taking a look at it. In the middle, we have a malicious stack, once again, pointing back to random numbers rather than a file between the 8th and the 9th frame. And on the right, we have a spoofed call stack, which between the leftmost and the rightmost, aside from there being more entries, it's a bit difficult to sort of tell the difference of that the right one is actually malicious. It's hiding its maliciousness, for lack of better words. So now we got to get hands-on. We've done enough reading. We have a basic high enough level understanding of how the process works. Now, the next step is, okay, if we really understand it, can we actually do it? So we're going to get hands-on. We're going to try to do it. Analyzing that stack of that call stack from Notepad in a debugger. I chose x64 debug because I'm not cool enough for WinDebug. We can see what the frames actually look like in memory. We can see the 4th frame that points back to kernel 32 is going to be up on the top, and right below it is the frame which points back to NTDLL. And the space between the kernel 32 spot and NTDLL spot, that's what sort of generates that frame. And from what we remember, what a frame looks like is the return address on top, which we can see, the kernel 32 address, followed by space, and in this case, it's a bunch of zeros. Now, we need to determine what is the size of that space. It seems arbitrary, but it's not. This goes back to what Klez was talking about. There's a data structure within files that kind of that you can use to calculate. We can also calculate them, or let me restate that. There's a data structure within files that you can calculate using the data within it to determine that size of the frame. This can be provided to us visually in a debugger if we look at the start of a function, since that's what the information actually pertains to. In this case, this topmost kernel 32 function begins by decrementing the stack pointer by 28. What this means is it's effectively reserving OX 28 bytes, which is hex number, 28 in hex bytes of space for the function. And we could see that reflected in our call stack, where we saw that there was a space of OX 28 between the kernel 32 frame and the NTDLL frame. And now we can see that that initial operation is what correlates to that size that we see. So now we know how to sort of determine stack size, at least visually. Using this information, we can sort of test our theory that we know what we're doing by trying to build our own fake frames. And I mean, we did it right here. Right below that last NTDLL frame, we've added some extra base thread init thumb frames in blue. And there's that OX30 stack size that we saw earlier, which is simply the decremented place plus space enough for the return address, which is 8 bytes. 8 plus 28 in hex is 30. I like, hex is weird. Then another observation we need to make is, why does it stop at the 7, right? And before, why did it only stop at a 5? In this case, in the process of experimenting with this hands-on, we get some additional insights. We start noticing that when the walk runs into a 0 as the return address, rather than interpreting a frame, it interprets the end of the walk. So we now have a technique to truncate our walk. I know this is a lot, but we'll be tying things together pretty soon. And we could sort of test this theory too by adding arbitrary numbers below the frames we just, those blue frames which we added before. We can see those random numbers are being populated, and then the moment it runs into a 0, it just stops, even though there's a return address placed below it. So rather than seeing 3 synthetic frames, we see 2, then we see 2 random numbers, and then the walk terminates. So sort of tying all this together right now, how a malware might weaponize this capability is it might start off by adding a 0 to its call stack record, right? Or calls to its call stack. So when the walk is performed, the walk will be truncated and hide the origin of the malware. Then it will possibly add 1, 2, or multiple of those fake frames that we were building before. That way, it can make it appear that when the actual operating system API is called, it was called by those fake frames we generated, effectively hiding the malware from being detected. But this runs into a problem. By adding these fake frames, the malware has tampered with the execution flow of the program, because when the callee is done executing, it has to return back. But rather than returning back to the malware, and because we've hidden the malware by creating fake frames, it's going to return to fake frames we've generated, which would crash the program or have unintended consequences. However, there is a solution to this, which is we add another fake frame using what's called a gadget. A gadget simply being existing code that within a file, specifically the instructions within there. It's this is a common technique used when it comes to exploitation. But basically, if we can locate a gadget and make a frame out of it and put it at the top, the gadget is backed by a file, so it still looks like it's a file-backed entry in call stack. But the gadget will allow us to also regain control of execution, and the malware won't crash anymore. So this probably looks terrible on there. It looked good on my machine, but we'll just have to deal with that. Trying to set up, once again, it's one thing to theory craft, it's one thing to read. You have to also do. So if we think this is how it works and how this can fix things, this is how the malware capability fixes itself, then we have to try to recreate it. So by shifting our debugger into a position in the code where the instruction pointer is at a return instruction, and then setting the return address to be the address of a gadget, we can try to step and follow execution along to see what happens. So at the top left, there's our current instruction pointer. It's about it in the next instruction, it's going to return. It's going to return to the return address, which is the on the bottom right in green, right? That this green highlight entry. If we look at the contents of that memory address, it is these 2 bytes FF23, which correspond to the instruction jump RBX. If we take a look at the RBX and we look at the address, or the contents of the address of the RBX, it's 4 A's. So now we're gonna single step and continue our execution. We're gonna see we've successfully returned to the gadget, right? The gadget being the jump RBX, which is highlighted in green. And now if we take a look at the contents of the RBX, it's some address. The contents of that address are 4 A's. So once again, we continue execution. We can see our instruction pointer has entered 4 A's and has crashed, which was the expected outcome because 4 A's is not a real location. So tying all this together, this is what what the malware effectively is going to look like when it weaponizes this technique. It'll have those fake frames that it generates, a gadget frame intercepting those fake frames, and the actual operating system API it's trying to call. Then it comes to creating a product. We did all of this within the debugger. We were manually changing register values. We were manually changing and pointing to locations in memory and then just searching through them. Now we need to think of a way we can turn this to a product. Well, Silent Moonwalk was already code, right? So what I'll answer this question in a bit, but we have to keep in mind, how do we want to weaponize it, or not weaponize this, create a product out of it. But before we make a product out of it, we have to think about what we like actually understand now, right? And we basically learned what synthetic frames are, how you can create your stack frame, and how can you desynchronize execution such that the usage of those frames does not crash the program. So what can we make out of this? Once again, blogs, code, and social media posts. That whole process I was talking about, that's a really good blog topic. And if you can include all the nuances and all the thought process, it's very valuable for people who want to follow in your steps in doing something. You can also write code out of it. Silent Moonwalk was a proof of concept written in 1,500 lines. So what if we can make something smaller? What if we can make something easier, something more digestible to do what we just did? And then social media. We want to share this information with other people so people have something that they want to investigate, or if we just want people to see what we're up to, different reasons. And as a side note, when you're making code, be careful with the comments and the things you write. People look at them. I learned that people actually do read them, and I had to fix them because they have funny words in them. With that being said, are there any questions? Oh, wow, we're 15 minutes early. Crazy. I don't see anything from Zoom. Bruh. Oh, chat shows up over there. Chat, are you here? All right, cool. I don't think we have any questions, so that gives us 15 minutes before who's up next, Bryce? Oh, yeah.
So we start getting really deep into the topic, you might have run into the roadblock where you have like no resources that like kind of help like that.
That's very interesting because it's quite a bit uncommon, at least starting off, because like I said at the beginning, everyone has already sort of done this stuff before. So you're really following off of the work of giants and just trying to recreate what they do and see if you can expand on it. But on the very rare occasion that you run into something, there's no documentation, no one's made anything public. You're, I like to say you're in the trenches for that one, but not really. This is where social media is really nice because there are experts in everything. They don't always publish everything they're doing because they're just really good at a lot of things. That's when you reach out to them and say, hey, this is where you get your business skills and try to get some really, try to start your social skills, get some information out of them, and say, hey, I'm curious, do you have any experience with this? As long as you can identify an expert in a particular field, and then, hit them up, it's pretty likely that they can give you some pointers or something to look at if they haven't already done it before. Yeah.
I think I did. But I'm kind of curious from a perspective, first theoretical that would be kind of found in like lab stuff. Do you think it would be it's a common vulnerability, so to speak, that you would generally be able to find?
It's not necessarily a vulnerability. It's an abuse of the intended functionality of the system. So it's a feature, not a bug. Now, as to if it's common or not, I would not be able to say because I would say it's a more novel capability public-wise. It's really been out and discussed for maybe a little over 2 years, and people are quite slow when it comes to integrating such capabilities, especially with such a low-level capability being integrated into larger projects tends to either break a lot of things or bring up a lot of edge cases that are unattended for, making it simply not possible to integrate it without a lot of time investment, hence the delay. Now, as for theoretical indicators of compromise or ways that you can sort of detect it, if going specifically into the details, right, we talked about the use as a gadget. This is very uncommon. When a call is made, it adds an entry to that call stack. That's it because it's a stack of calls. When you return to a gadget, you're not returning to a call because when a call is made, execution goes one place, then it comes back to the destination after the call. If we notice when we are at the gadget, well, I guess there's no picture because I didn't take a good screenshot, but it is not preceded by a call. It is very uncommon for this activity to sort of happen. Now, this isn't something you're going to manually be finding because if you think about how a program works, a process might have like 10 threads. Those 10 threads are making 20 calls every like 5 seconds. So, and that's just one process of 400 running on your computer. There is no human way where you can take a look at every side and say, yeah, found something weird. This is where the programmatic side of things comes in, programmatic detections, hunting for these sort of things. Now, it might not be a programmatic detection, it might be programmatic telemetry, such as through an antivirus or an antivirus's driver that gets this information and then passes it to another higher level piece of technology within the detection stack, which then analyzes it and says, hey, this thing's up to no good, kill it, right? And that's how it would probably go. And in fact, detections have existed recently, though. After I put out my blog post and some proof of concepts, Elastic put out some rules specifically hunting for the stuff that I was using. I believe it's coincidental, but detections do exist. It is not foolproof. Nothing, hardly anything is ever foolproof. Yeah.
Well, okay. So basically what you're saying is that in terms of detecting this particular abuse or exploit, you would be essentially looking specifically for the gadget in any given call stack of every single process or thread.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
It is quite now it is difficult computationally, but that has been the sort of the process of it. Now, some people do things a little differently. They call stacks sometimes might only be analyzed upon the thread that the call stack pertains to when it goes to what's called sleep mode, right? So if like if you ever run like in Python, like you told your Python program to sleep, or you wrote in Bash to sleep, right? That thread is then going to go to sleep. And sometimes that's when that telemetry comes in. And if they're using this particular technique during the sleep, it becomes a lot more feasible because sleeping threads are a lot less frequent than active threads, which are constantly making more and more new calls. So that sleeping threads acts as a way of filtration.
Just make sure I understood that. Basically saying that if threads that sleep are more likely to possibly be related to like malware or something.
I wouldn't say it's more likely that they're going to be used for malware. I would say it's easier to hunt malware using this technique by only checking those sleeping threads if you want to avoid heavy computational expenses. Because checking for sleeping threads, then checking the sleeping threads themselves, you're checking like maybe like a tenth of what you would be checking. Actually, probably less, because if you're checking active calls, there's hundreds being made at any given moment.
And it might be adding a little bit too much to that, but how does that relate then to your work on sleep obfuscation?
Oh man, sleep obfuscation. That's how can you repeat the question? How does what relate to sleep obfuscation?
The part where, so basically you're saying that, it would be more computationally feasible for, you or something to be looking at sleeping threads to determine if there might be like a gadget somewhere in the
Yes.
callback. But if you can obfuscate when your malicious callback is sleeping, then it effectively becomes the same problem. You just have to check everything within it.
I wouldn't say, not necessarily. So there are variations of sleep obfuscation malware techniques which hide the call stack, but they have their own indicators of compromise in other senses. And I don't want to dig too deep into that. That's something we could talk about after. But if there's any other questions, or if you have anything else. Yeah. Huh? Oh, all right, self-plug time. Go to https://dtsec.us. I hope I spelled that right. It's bad when I type it. Yeah, see, Nigerald, one of my many names. So a lot of my more recent posts are technical. But if you go to the older ones, you could see I was publishing everything that I was doing that I thought was interesting and worth the time to take to publish. When I was talking about learning IP tables, I wrote a blog on that. When I was an addict in something called Hack the Box, I was doing box after box. I made a Swift workshop and made a blog post out of it because that was one of the most stressful experiences I had in my freshman year. Thank you, Alex. Shout out to Alex for helping me fix everything, and for Luis and installing MS SQL in October of 2021. I didn't know how to do that.
Do we have any more questions in the room?
Oh, I see that. How do you deal? Okay. Oh, wait, I could pull it up. All right, chat. We gotta stop saying that. Not really a tech question, but how do you deal with the roadblock or the moments of frustration? Yeah, all this that I compressed into like 10 slides was the result of like a 4-month-long process and many sleepless nights. My roommates in Texas can probably testify seeing me fall asleep on the floor some nights because I was like, I need to take a break, and I'll just kind of drop and then wake up like, huh? But yeah, going back to, so yeah, there was frustration and uncertainty. And how do you actually deal with it? It's pretty difficult, unsurprisingly. You really have to weigh in how much am I gonna have to put to get around this, if it's even possible, versus basically, is it worth it to try to get around this? And I don't even know if it's possible. This is where I like to do the phone a friend tech and start calling people who are smarter than me or have done more research in related areas, and kind of putting in my input, putting in my roadblocks, and seeing what's their perspective. It's one thing to see things from your perspective. It's another thing to see something from another perspective. And so a whole nother thing when a guy way smarter than you is, telling things from their perspective, and you're like, wow, I never would have imagined that. That took you 3 minutes to figure out. I'm sad. I've been stuck on this for 2 weeks. But yeah, basically ask for help and think, what are the other things I want to do? Is it really worth for me to dig this much deeper, or can I be satisfied with what I've accomplished so far? Because there are times where I kind of quit on projects.
If any questions come up for Dylan, you can ask it in his channel in the Tech Symposium Discord. Just keep pinging him and he'll answer. I guarantee it.
Oh, I don't have Discord open right now.
For future reference. If that's all, then thank you so much, Dylan. Megan?